Coach, thanks for all your thoughts. It was awesome so far. We're going to pivot now to a segment on the show that we call Start, Sub, or Sit. And so for those maybe listening for the first time, we're going to give you three options around a topic, ask you to start one, sub one, and sit one, and then we'll discuss from there. So, Coach, if you're all set, we'll dive into this first one.
Okay.
Okay. Pat, little change up for me here.
All right.
Coach, this first one has to do with a topic that we've probably talked with more coaches about this spring and summer than anything, and that's offensive rebounding and trying to figure out how to get more of them. And so this first start sub sit has to do with offensive rebounding considerations. And when you're thinking about missed shots, start sub sit, what's going to be most important to you? So option one is how many you're going to send to the glass. Option two is how you're going to send them to the glass, the rules that they have. Or option three is really the most important thing, is how you're building your transition defense and who's getting back rather than who's going and things like that. So start, sub, sit, offensive rebounding considerations.
Right. And so I'm right on this. The start means the one that's most important to me.
Correct. Yep.
It's funny because I just had this conversation with a coach earlier today, and I have always leaned on being good in transition defense first. So I've always erred on the side of worrying more about getting our 1 and 2 back, 2 guards back on the flight of the ball, and being good or very good in transition defense. My reason is that the best teams on our schedule, the most dangerous games, the 50-50 games, or the most meaningful games, will be won and lost in that area more times than not. And the more talented that the other team is, the more vital it is on my end that I don't allow them to get fouls, dunks, high percentage shots, open 3-point shots by great shooters in transition. If I can make the game 5-on-5, that allows my team to have the best opportunity to win, because we're going to rebound better, we're going to defend better. In those easy coveted baskets that talented teams get, you're not going to be able to get as many. So I've always leaned on getting transition defense first, offensive rebounding second.
And Coach, between the, I guess the sub and the sit, or your second, third options here, but how many and how to send. Do you have any thoughts on how many? You said 1 and 2 are back, but how those 3, 4, and 5 are going to the glass, and how you talk about that?
So before this coming year, we just tried to really emphasize it, and in particular our 4 and 5. Full disclosure, like if you're going to lean one way or the other and you're leaning more towards transition defense, there were times when we might have been able to crash the offensive glass at a higher rate. But, I almost feel like it's a tug of war with your own team. And the tug of war for me usually leans towards being the best we can be in transition defense. However, we are aware of 3, 4, and 5. And if we sense lack of effort or, fatigue, or even the other is that we're doing a great job, we really would love to get 3 on the glass. Certainly our 4 and 5, we want them to give great effort on every shot.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Pat.
The last part, though, is I think with more spacing on offense and teams playing more perimeter players than maybe we have in the past, I would be a coach that's doing that the thought of taking guys from the weak side corner or the break, regardless of whether you're a point guard or 2 guard, and allow them, especially on a shot that's taken from the other side or at the top, allow them to run and crash, knowing that if they don't get it, they go through the nail and back. I do think there's some value in it. Teams are having great success doing it. And it makes sense to me just because with more spacing, what you're not as good at is to get those 3 guys on the glass on every shot, and allowing maybe 4 or 5 the opportunity could get maybe that coveted 1 or 2 without compromising your transition defense. So I'm investigating that. I wouldn't say we've made our decision, but I think we're aware that teams are doing that.
Sure.
Yeah. Coach, with sending the 1 and 2 back, I'm curious just how you're helping the 1 and 2, how you're helping them, teaching them to get back so where the rim's protected, but you're also getting a good pickup point on the ball.
So we call it halfback, fullback. We want to leave on the rise of the shot I wish we were perfect at doing it. It takes a lot of discipline. It really takes like stick-to-itiveness on an everyday basis by somebody that's on your staff. Even on our 5-on-0 when we're implementing our sets or running our offense against no defense, it's an ideal way to just kill two birds with one stone. And that is, look, on the rise of the shot, our 1 and 2, you have to get back. And with halfback, that means, he's halfway back. He stopped the ball. I would say that, a huge, big step in front of the NBA 3-point line, if not a step and a half, meaning towards half court is where we would love the ball to be able to be stopped. And we would want our fullback, he takes the basket or the hole, and we want him to be in the paint. And, he's responsible for the deep advanced pass where he has to bounce out. He's also, number one, responsible for the rim runner to take away the dunk. And, the halfback's responsible for stop the ball, which could include an earlier advanced pass where, he takes that one as well. So getting those guys back and allowing 3, 4, and 5 to join them is what we try to do.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of finish out your break, I guess the 3, 4, and 5, depending on how they get back, what's like the next, you want the ball stopped, the rim taken care of. What's like the next order of operation that you're kind of harping on with those 3, 4, and 5s?
Yeah, Patrick, it really depends now on the style. It used to be, especially our 5, we wanted him to bounce out the fullback. So in other words, like an offensive team has a rim runner. Well, in some ways, our transition defense, we're going to take our rim runner and make our 5, and he's going to run, rim to rim. And we don't want that fullback staying in the lane and giving up threes, right? We want him to hold. Yeah. Then we want him to be able to bounce out. But what we have found is, there are a lot of teams who don't necessarily have that rim runner. And, in that case, your 2-man may start there or your point guard's back as the fullback, and he's going to bounce out with common sense really early because, hey, coach, there is no rim runner. And with the 5 is going to point, talk, match up on the perimeter somewhere. But if they do have a traditional rim runner, getting your front court, especially your 5-man, to run and bounce out that fullback would be the next priority. And then look, from there, it's you tried the offensive rebound, you weren't successful, run hard, play the game, point, talk, match up, and communicate and make the game 5-on-5. And again, I think the more that we can make the game 5-on-5, the better defensive team we'll have.
Yeah. And Coach, just my last question on this. In transition, have you found certain actions you have to come back to work on the guard over and over, at the college level, whether it's a drag or the quick delay and swing and zoom, all the stuff that teams run now. We're kind of talking about getting back and getting set 5-on-5, things that you feel like have needed more attention recently.
Yeah, I think the two things that really stand out for me is I'll use UConn as the example with Caravan, who's an ultra skilled 4-man, and yet they have a center on the team that if he's setting a drag screen and rolling to the rim, or if he's ahead of the ball and rim running, that he can really score the ball. Like he's an efficient, good player. It's difficult, right? Because, on one hand, you're trying to point, talk, match up, stop the ball to not give up the open 3-point shot, which they can kill you with. But yeah, you also got to make sure that you don't give up the dunk in the play at the rim. So I think when you have a drag screen and you have that 4-out spacing with a good center, I just think no matter what they're doing, especially if they're running hard with a lot of pace, that becomes problematic. And I think, coaching against UConn, people talk a lot about their half-court offense, and it's obviously very good. But if you really look closely when they're at their best, it's when they're in transition and they get points. And when they get those, plus their half-court offense, that's when they're unbeatable. So I think that stands out. I think the other thing that stands out is Gonzaga. Tommy Lloyd's at Arizona now. He's an extension of that. But Mark Few at Gonzaga, I don't think anybody has done that better than, the pressure of a trailer with a rim runner, and how that can really dismantle you. Foul trouble, high lows, and then, second action where the ball just can go from transition to first side, second side seamlessly. And that was very difficult for us to guard when we played Gonzaga over my time at Arizona.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Coach, my last question, if just sitting on the 1-5 drag screen, I guess from like a base defense, are you more inclined to try to shoot that guard under a drag screen and see what the defense will do, or just kind of lock and chase over and kind of corral with the 5?
Yeah, no, look, if the guard can beat the screen, whether that's over the top with very little help or can get under it, because the one thing about drags, if you're coaching the offense, it's not as easy to get a good screen. And then sometimes you almost want that drag screener to just tap and go, right? And run to the rim. So with it, I think defensively, it's, if no screen is set, recognize it and, be good enough and tough enough and aware enough that you don't always need a scheme against that drag, because quite frankly, like, they're pushing it and they have great pace, but they're really not setting it. So don't scheme it. Like it just, so it's beat the screen underneath, beat the screen over the top. But I do think drag screens guarding the screener, you just want to have an awareness of, does the defender guarding the ball need my help? Yes or no? But we usually don't ask him to hard hedge or do much as just be responsible and mostly be in front of the drag screen, right? Where the worst is when they're setting a drag screen and your defender guarding the screener is just getting into the play. That's when it doesn't matter what you do, you're done, right? So get back to my point of, can you get back? Can you have the help? Can you stop the ball? I think that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, Pat.
All right, Coach, keeping it moving. This next start sub sit, me and Dan were brainstorming for quite a while, so hopefully it's in a good spot for you, ready for it. But we call this purposeful cross-matching considerations. So when you're headed in a game, considerations that would cause you to want to cross-match or switch up your matchups. So, and then the start would be their most important, or well, I'll just say it. Here we go. Option 1, to keep certain players out of actions, depending on your opponent and the scout, if they're going to be heavy pick and roll, heavy off ball, and you want to just make sure this player is not involved in those actions. Option 2 is to create an individual defensive advantage. Put one your best defender is always going to be on their best defender, or your best defender is always going to be in the ball screens. Or option 3 is just simply to save a player, usually for offense, one of your better players. You don't want to burn him having to guard both ends because offensively you need him.
I would start with option 2, and that is to create a defensive advantage against an elite player. I would say that the one awareness that we have learned when you do that is, it's back to what you just finished talking about. If the team you're playing is very good in transition, and like when you talk cross match, let's say you have a small forward, like we had Colby Jones 2 years ago, and we want to put him on Tristan Newton, who's UConn's point guard. One of the things that I always look at is, well, we're asking Colby to crash the offensive glass as a 3, 4, and 5, right? And now you're also asking him to guard an elite guard who pushes the pace. Mm-hmm. Is that worth the trade-off of taking him off the offensive glass? Or can you even do it knowing that there are times when I don't care how much you want Colby on Tristan Newton, the pace of the game won't allow it. So I think if we're going to cross match, we want to have the peace of mind that we're going to be able to not give up something with our transition defense first.
Yeah.
But we would try to do that simply because I think we would want our best defensive player on maybe an offensive player that we look at as problematic. That's when we would cross match to give ourselves a defensive advantage.
Yeah. And I guess you brought up a really good point where, if you have a 3 on your 1, how does that affect your offensive rebounding, your transition defense? In this situation, then now if you have a 1 on a 3 where maybe there's a size elsewhere, I guess maybe in that case, in that UConn game, what were the considerations you were thinking about then, or the probable fires you were thinking about putting out when you're taking a smaller guy off the ball and putting him on a wing matchup?
Right. So that is the second. Is that wing player a post-up threat? Is he, more importantly, is he a really good offensive rebounder? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the big difference between UConn 2 years ago. By the way, like, me arriving at Xavier has coincided with UConn winning 2 national championships. So, it's like, as my plane landed, they became the new UConn, right? But 2 years ago, we were able to beat them twice. It's all forgotten now. You almost don't even remember it. But I think part of why we had a good team first, but I think the other part of it is, when we were able to cross match, we would be able to get away with it because we would play one of their perimeter players as a non-shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So you took somebody who physically wasn't as big and you put him in the lane and just said, you know what? If tonight he makes threes, we're going to lose. But this is our best bet, to have a bigger player on Tristan Newton and maybe have a smaller player on a guy who's really good, but not a three-point shooter, and just say, let's see if we can get away with this.
Sure.
That may have contributed to the win or wins 5% or 10%, but I do think it helped us. If you were playing against them this year, that was not in consideration, because they had nobody on the court that you could play a smaller guy on and get away with it. Nobody.
For sure. Go ahead, Pat, if you have fault.
Yeah, Coach. So this question was kind of born out of, like, when you have a weaker defender and just thinking of ways like how would you try to hide them. And so maybe just pulling out of this question and sort of, a cross matching is a solution, but how you just think about, let's take like perimeter players, like just think about working with weak perimeter defenders that are going to play, and how you try to help them, whether it's schematically or individually, so they're not completely giving up everything that they may give back on offense to your team.
Right. And you're talking about when he's more of a liability on defense.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I probably over my time have gotten better at being more patient with that type of player, because, look, we aspire to be good at both offense and defense. And I think sometimes as a head coach, when you lean more towards one versus the other, you're not as patient in the area you're leaning towards, right? If I'm an offensive coach and it's about score, 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 I'm not valuing, the physical defense that maybe somebody who can't make a shot gives me. Conversely, if I'm favoring more defense, which I would say over my time, I've probably leaned a little bit more towards defense. You're not valuing this elite player's ability to shoot the three and what he brings to the table. I coached a player at Arizona that I wish I would have been a little more patient with early in my career. Towards the end of his career, I was, and that was Gabe York. Because what I learned, especially in Gabe's like sophomore year, maybe at the beginning of his junior year, he gave us an ingredient that was so different from the rest of our personnel that I believe he made us an elite team. He made us better because he could change the game with his shooting. He was highly, highly skilled. He wasn't as big and as physical or maybe even as talented defensively as some of the guys that played more or started. But I think the blend of what he gave us made us a more difficult team to beat. It gave us a higher ceiling, and I think that's the other thing you learn in recruiting and building your roster, having more of a blend, but knowing that when you have the blend, you're more patient with those that can't do certain things either offensively or defensively. I also don't think you give him a free pass, that player. Like, it's not that you can't hold him accountable, but I think if you really understands his limitations and coach him to be the best he can be, and then also know that he gives us an upside on the other side of the ball that we just don't have without him, the highest ceiling possible will accompany that patience with your team.
Absolutely.
If that makes
Yeah.
The older you get, the more you realize it. Like the Miami Heat, when I watch them, I think they're really good at that right there. where, when you think of Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley and the Heat culture, no one's going to say that they're soft or they don't defend or they don't have schemes defensively. Like they're about it. They're physical. They're wired. But yet, if you look at their team, they have a couple guys they're playing and they're utilizing and leveraging them on offense in a way that's super creative. And yet you can't tell me that they think that same player is their answer on defense, but I think the ingredients of what those players can give them offensively, they look at as giving their own team the highest upside. And I think that's something you learn over time as a coach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Pat.
Dan. And that was going to be my follow-up, coach, just with this defensive liability player and knowing, though, that what he can give you on offense and the example of Gabe York, how much then are you thinking about, like, hey, when he's in the game, we can't just like simply let our offense flow versus like we always got to be leveraging him. Maybe not he needs always be shooting or scoring, but we have to make sure we're using his skill set so we can get his advantage on offense versus, well, we're just going to let it flow and, it'll work itself out.
Yeah. Your great question. And the leverage is I think the analytically more of the new way than it's ever been before. So it's not just to understand that the more he's out there, he's a weapon, he's a threat. He gives you an ingredient that otherwise maybe you don't have without him. But while he's in, having sets after timeouts, side out of bounds, underneath out of bounds, those special quick hitters that are just wired for that special skill, I think that's how you can really bring out the best in what he doesn't do for you defensively.
For sure. And coach, just my quick last question, and shout out to Gabe York, went to school not too far from here, Orange Lutheran.
He's a great
California.
He's a great kid, and he had a senior year for us at Arizona that he doesn't get enough credit for. I mean, I think in one game against Stanford, he made 9 3-point shots, but yeah, he can really get going.
Absolutely. And my last, I guess, question on all this, and Pat and I were discussing this for a long time before we hopped on this morning with you, is, when you have someone that's maybe a weaker defender, the philosophy of, well, that person's not going to switch, or we want them to switch more stuff, or we're going to hedge ball screens to help them. Or I guess, like, I know it varies player to player, but in general, when you have someone like that, are you trying to keep them out of help side or trying to not switch? All the things that might go into maximizing whatever defensive stuff they do have. Well,
yeah, I mean, following this podcast, the brilliance of these coaches, especially in Europe, the NBA, and I really think it's now come into college more, where you just simply set a screen to make the other team switch. Several years ago, a perimeter on perimeter screen on the ball was just nonsense. We're just going to switch and we're going to be fine. Now the creative aspect of, well, you make them switch and then you punish the weak defender after the switch in these various ways. I think there's more of that going on. So I think the one thing that we really try to do is, sometimes it's just size difference, is not allow them to do that and teach guards to hedge. So, bigs always have been taught in the way we do it to hedge. And you work the guard on the ball, make them use the screen, beat the screen, tough on the ball, over the ball screen and under the hedge, things like that. But now, I think it's equally important that your guards can hedge and not give up the matchup, where, they can stay on their own offensive matchup. It's important.
Absolutely.
We do that now. And again, back to my earlier point, instead of us doing that 2 days before we play Villanova, we try to make it more a part of our system, whether it be in the summer, fall, so that we get to it earlier, we teach them earlier. And now when we're 3 days before the game, it's part of our system instead of introducing something that might be unique.